Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're tackling what is, without a doubt, the most profound, monumental, and hotly debated topic in all of human history. We're looking at a question of immense gravity, a question that has haunted, inspired, and fundamentally shaped humanity since the very dawn of conscious thought. So take a moment to settle in, because what we're about to unpack is deeply fascinating and, frankly, inescapable.
Does God exist? Wow. Just standing in front of a question like that is incredibly humbling, isn't it? What makes it so uniquely heavy isn't just its intellectual weight. It's the fact that this is absolutely not merely an academic exercise. This isn't just some abstract thought experiment meant for philosophers locked away in ivory towers.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Because how you answer this question, or even if you decide it just can't be answered, literally rewires your entire worldview. It touches absolutely everything. It frames how we view death, how we understand love, how we process suffering, the very basis of our morality, and our place in cosmic history. It is perhaps the ultimate universal thread that ties the entire human experience together.
Section 1. Antiquity. Which God rules? To really get a grip on this question, we've got to travel back in time to an era where the fundamental assumptions about the universe were entirely different from our own today. Picture the ancient world. The supernatural realm was completely self-evident. Nature itself was assumed to be literally animated by divine forces. Because of this, as our source material highlights, atheism wasn't just rare, it was almost incomprehensible to them. It wasn't seen as a coherent philosophical position at all. Instead, it was usually treated as a bizarre eccentricity, kind of like claiming the sky wasn't blue, or it was weaponized as a political charge just to ruin a rival's reputation. You didn't argue that the gods didn't exist, you argued over whose gods were stronger.
So, what were the ancients actually arguing about? Well, the debate wasn't about whether divinity existed. That was an absolute given. Instead, the argument centered entirely on allegiance. Which pantheon actually holds authority? How is the divine structured? The fierce, world-shaping debates of that time were all about monotheism versus polytheism, ritual efficacy, and civic duty. It was an era defined by a very crowded cosmos.
Section 2. The Enlightenment, the Great Pivot. All right, now we're hitting a massive intellectual earthquake in human history. This is a period that changed the trajectory of human thought forever.
And this brilliantly illustrates the fundamental reframing of the question itself. While antiquity asked, which God is true, the Enlightenment completely flipped the script. Instead of assuming the universe was full of divine actors and trying to figure out which one was in charge, philosophers started asking if a supernatural governor was required in the first place. Does any God exist?
You can actually track this evolution right through time. We started in an era where nature was assumed to be animated by divine forces, making allegiance and ritual the absolute center of human life. Then boom, the Enlightenment hits. It started treating nature more like a giant ticking clockwork machine, which fundamentally demanded empirical evidence over assumption. And that brings us to the contemporary era, where science explains the sheer mechanical workings of the universe, and our focus has shifted entirely to debates around meaning, purpose, and whether the concept of the divine is strictly necessary at all.
Section 3. What caused the shift? 3 intellectual developments. So how on earth did we get from antiquity to the Enlightenment? Well, the 17th and 18th centuries served as the ultimate breeding ground for 3 major intellectual movements that forced this profound transition.
Let's move to and see how this builds, because this definitely didn't happen overnight. It was a cascade of rapid-fire philosophical and scientific changes. It kicks off with the scientific revolution in the 1600s, bleeds into epistemological skepticism in the 1700s, and culminates in the autonomy of reason by the 1780s. Let's break each of these down and see exactly how they dismantled the ancient worldview.
The first massive shift, the concept of the mechanical universe. Think of heavy hitters like Galileo and Newton. They completely shattered the old worldview by demonstrating that physical phenomena, something as massive and awe-inspiring as planetary motion, could actually be accurately predicted using natural laws and mathematical equations. Suddenly, you didn't need to appeal to direct divine intervention to explain why Jupiter moved across the night sky. The universe had rules.
And the fallout from all that math was huge. Because natural laws were suddenly explaining more and more of the day-to-day workings of the universe, the space left for what was called a God of the gaps started to shrink rapidly. If gravity and mathematics could explain the orbit of a planet, a supernatural explanation was no longer strictly required for that specific phenomenon. The gaps in human knowledge were closing, and with them, the immediate everyday need for divine explanations.
Hot on the heels of that came epistemological skepticism. Philosophers like René Descartes, John Locke, and David Hume started asking a really uncomfortable question. How do humans actually know anything at all? Hume, in particular, took direct aim at miracles and the teleological argument, which is the classic argument from design. He challenged the idea that just because the universe looks designed, it must have a divine designer. This deep skepticism heavily battered the traditional proofs for God that had gone virtually unquestioned for centuries.
Finally, we reached the autonomy of reason, championed by Immanuel Kant. Kant basically argued that all those classical proofs for God, the ones trying to logically deduce a creator just from the existence of the universe, were logically insufficient. He concluded that God couldn't be a scientifically demonstrable fact. Instead, to put it simply, he argued that God could only be understood as a necessary foundation for human morality. It was a requirement for a practical, ethical life, rather than something you could definitively prove in a laboratory or map through a telescope.
Section 4. Contemporary Echoes, Why We Still Ask. All of that wild intellectual history brings us right up to today. Because after all the scientific revolutions and all the intense philosophical deconstructions of the Enlightenment, the core question is not vanished. It echoes just as loudly right now as it ever did.
Today, the question endures because it sits exactly at the intersection of our most profound fields of inquiry. Whether we're looking outward at the baffling, mind-bending mysteries of quantum cosmology, or looking inward at the hard problem of human consciousness, objective morality, and our deep thirst for existential meaning, the question of God is woven into all of it. Science didn't eliminate the mystery, guys. In many ways, it completely deepened it. So the crucial point is this. Empirical science is absolutely unparalleled at offering us descriptions of the universe's mechanisms. It tells us how things happen right down to the subatomic level. But it leaves the question of purpose, of agency, of why things happen in the first place completely open. That heavy lifting, that search for underlying meaning, well, that's left entirely to the realm of philosophy and existentialism.
And this brings us to the sheer scale, the incredible universality of this mystery. It demands total intellectual honesty, while simultaneously pulling on every emotional cord we possess. It truly doesn't matter if you're an astrophysicist analyzing data from the James Webb Space Telescope, an ancient philosopher debating in the markets of Athens, or just someone sitting quietly in a room looking up at the night sky. The awe is identical.
As our source beautifully puts it, we are all staring at the exact same mystery. It's worth just taking a second to feel the weight of that. This single inquiry connects us to almost every single human being who has ever lived on this planet.
And so we're left right back where we started, standing before the ultimate unknown. After thousands of years of debate, of scientific revolutions, and philosophical deconstruction, the mystery remains wide open for you to gaze into. Does God exist?